After almost a decade of difficult negotiations, the United States and Saudi Arabia finally signed one of the most consequential strategic agreements in recent Middle Eastern history. On paper, it looks perfectly harmless. The agreement allows American companies to build civilian nuclear reactors in Saudi Arabia, enabling the kingdom to generate electricity through nuclear energy instead of relying entirely on fossil fuels. A peaceful nuclear program, clean energy, economic diversification. Everything sounds perfectly reasonable. Or does it? Because the moment we look beyond the headlines, a series of uncomfortable questions begin to emerge. Let's start with the most obvious one. Saudi Arabia isn't a country struggling to find energy. Quite the opposite. It possesses some of the largest proven crude oil reserves on the planet and has built its prosperity on exporting that very resource. So why does an energy-rich nation suddenly need nuclear power? The Saudi answer is straightforward. As the world steadily moves towards cleaner sources of energy, the kingdom also wants to diversify its energy mix and reduce domestic dependence on oil. On the surface, that argument makes sense. But it immediately raises another question. If Saudi Arabia begins producing much of its electricity from nuclear energy, what happens to the oil it no longer consumes at home? Does it simply export even more crude oil to the rest of the world? If that happens, is the global dependence on fossil fuels really being reduced or merely being redistributed? And then comes another puzzle. If the kingdom's objective is clean energy, why choose nuclear power at all? Saudi Arabia possesses one of the world's greatest natural advantages for renewable energy. Its vast deserts receive abundant sunshine throughout the year, making them ideal for large-scale solar farms. Many regions also have considerable wind energy potential. So why pursue the far more expensive, technologically demanding and politically sensitive option of nuclear power? This is where geopolitics enters the picture. Saudi Arabia lives in one of the world's most volatile neighborhoods. Across the Persian Gulf lies Iran, a country that has spent decades developing sophisticated nuclear technology despite sanctions, international pressure, and military threats. Although Tehran insists its nuclear program is peaceful, many governments remain convinced that Iran has moved dangerously close to acquiring the capability to produce weapons-grade material. Naturally, strategic analysts ask an uncomfortable question. Could Saudi Arabia's civilian nuclear program eventually provide it with the technological foundation to develop a military nuclear capability if the regional security environment deteriorates? Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has publicly stated that if Iran were ever to acquire a nuclear weapon, Saudi Arabia would seek one as well. That statement has never really disappeared from the strategic conversation. Which brings us to perhaps the most important question of all. Why is Washington willing to facilitate this agreement now? Does it suggest that the American policymakers have quietly accepted the possibility that Iran may eventually retain a latent or even operational nuclear weapons capability? And that brings us to the most disturbing question. Has Washington surrendered itself to the possibility that it has failed to stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons, the denial of which was the fundamental mission objectives of the current Israel-US-Iran war? If so, does this agreement represent an attempt to restore the regional balance of power rather than simply promote civilian nuclear energy? That would mark a profound shift in American strategy. The official American argument is different. Washington maintains that if it had refused to cooperate, Saudi Arabia would eventually have turned to Russia or China for nuclear technology. There is certainly some logic in that argument, but there is another perspective. Given the kingdom's decades-old strategic partnership with the United States and the advanced reputation of American nuclear technology, many analysts believe Riyadh would always have preferred Washington over either Moscow or Beijing. If that assessment is correct, did the United States have more negotiating leverage than it admits? Only time will tell. But one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The Middle East is entering a new strategic era. Israel already possesses nuclear weapons, although it has never officially acknowledged them. Iran continues to expand its nuclear capabilities under intense international scrutiny. And Saudi Arabia is now embarking on a civilian nuclear program. backed by the United States. Whether this remains an energy story or eventually evolves into a regional nuclear competition will depend on the decisions yet to be made. The latest news from Washington is that Saudi Arabia needs to sign the Abraham Accords, thus normalizing relations with Israel before the nuclear agreement is enforced. The questions, however, have already arrived. And perhaps the most important one is this. Has the world just witnessed the beginning of a new nuclear balance in the Middle East? Or the first chapter of a much more dangerous arms race? I'll leave that for you to decide.